All right, we're going to go live here with our fifth live stream of the day. Can you guys hear me okay? Nope.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. And let me unmute my Mike, you can unmute yourself there. This is the Mises Pack Money Bomb. We've had a full day so far, and we've got lots of other great guests to go, but we have one of our favorite people, Michael Boldin from the 10th Amendment Center. How are you today, Mike?
What's good, my dudes? Thanks for having me here.
First of all, before while Mike is getting his food together there, why don't you show us that shirt, everybody?
Oh, this is the legendary Contra Krugman shirt that was given to me at an event called the Contra Cruise a few years ago. It's actually my jammies. I never wanted to tell Tom this, but it's my way of sleeping with them every night. I mean, then he's like there snuggling me at all times. And so it's Murphy.
Yeah, Murphy's a good cuddler too, by the looks of it.
I don't want to go there.
We just did. That's what this whole thing is going to be about. Like, why are we not at another 100 donors yet? That's the question. Where are we at?
So
we've gotten about 50 so far today, right?
We're over 50. And speaking of 50, somebody just became a $50 a month donor and put us over 5,000. So we're actually pretty much at 5,050, which is right at our all-time high where we were before COVID hit. So we've recovered everything, and we've only just recently started fundraising, and this is like the culmination of that. Again, we hadn't fundraised the entire year up until like earlier this month. So that is fantastic. Thank you guys for hitting that threshold. Now the next threshold that we've got to hit is we are at 377 recurring donors. I would like to bump that up. Those are rookie numbers, up to 400. So again, if you can give $5 a month, you'll be in the running for the rifle. You'll be in the running for these Mises Institute silver rounds that we have left. Still have 4 of those to give away. Yep. And you'll be helping us with candidates like we interviewed earlier, and you'll be helping us with causes like what we're going to be talking with Boldin here.
Well, I just wanted to throw out there, there's no better way, if you haven't already bought some other garbage with it, to spend that illegal, unconstitutional, Fed-printed crap that they sent out to people than to throw it to the Mises caucus, right? Like, how else can you tell the state, screw you, then take whatever they print and hand out to everybody that they shouldn't be doing in the first place and give it to a cause that's working to bring most of what they do to an end?
Plus, we like I said, we got these silver rounds when they were about $12, and silver is hovering around 30. It was over 30, so
that's amazing.
It's probably 28 or so right now, but it definitely went over 30. So we have to get rid of these before the feds come for their capital gains or some crazy shit like that.
They always do.
But yeah, so all right, that's the segue into the interview portion. I will say, before we get started, I will say that there are 2 organizations that really inspired me conceptually on what I want this thing to look like and run like and what I want it to achieve. And that was Young Americans for Liberty with their win at the door and their hyper-focus on state-level races. Not that we get involved in state-level races, but that hyper-focus on one particular goal. So our goal was to kind of replicate that at the local level within the LP.
You're not saying you're totally ruling that out. You're just not ready organizationally to be doing that yet, right?
Well, that and to be frank with you, I don't know that the LP is ready organizationally.
Yeah, okay.
And basically, we are following a we'll get into it.
Yeah, okay. Sorry to jump in there, but I mean, to me, it's like you're thinking about what Cliff and YAL has been doing, and I think they've actually had some pretty good success. And they're not huge by any stretch of the imagination. Like, that certainly can be done at some point. I don't know the logistics ends of it, though.
Well, I would say once libertarians start winning state house races, then we can get there. Right now, we're pursuing a strategy of libertarians can and do win at the county level and lower. And that's also where you have a wide effect when you get in there. So, we can be the people that introduce nullification legislation and all that kind of stuff. So I'm basically trying to clean up the local level while y'all is doing the state level thing. And the idea there is that the combined efforts of the two of them really open up the pathway for liberty. And to get kind of dark and gloomy, I'm of the opinion that that we can't save this ship, that there will eventually be that financial collapse that we've been talking about for 100 years, and and that will happen, and that when that happens, the reaction is going to be for the feds to implement or propose some solution to the problem that they caused, and then that the states and the localities will be the ones to decide to go along with it or not. So if we don't have that presence in the states and the localities, it's going to be rebooting of the matrix, and we got a serious problem for the foreseeable future. Go ahead.
Pick me. Okay, so that makes me think, and I know we're really we're just free flowing here, but
yeah,
that approach that you're putting in at LPMC and that thought process to me reminds me, LPMC, a lot of great readers out there, right? I'm sure a lot of you guys out there have actually read the Blowback trilogy from Chalmers Johnson. This was on Ron Paul's recommended reading list at least the second presidential campaign, talking about foreign policy. And I saw Chalmers Johnson give a speech before he passed away a few years ago. And he basically talked about, the way he put it that stuck with me is he says, things that can't go on forever don't. And the amount of money that they're having to print or borrow from the Chinese to prop up this system cannot continue forever. But he gave a warning with that. And I know a lot of people think there'll be another glorious American revolution. He says, but if you really study history, most of the time during a crazy collapse like that, most of the time throughout history, out of the ashes rises a stronger dictator, a Mao, for example. So it's really incumbent upon us to really focus on this educational effort like what you guys are doing. Thomas Jefferson, for example, if you want to cite a founder, at one point, I think it was 1816, he wrote a letter and he said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. So education really is that foundational principle. But there's also the process, and you're talking about YAL and the work that we do here at 10th Amendment Center. There is the activism to try to put it into practice. There's no better way to educate people than showing people how the shit works when you actually advance liberty.
That quote, actually, the things that can't go on forever won't. Ron Paul has been quoting that directly on the Liberty Report lately. So that's great.
Nice. I haven't watched him for about a week or so I had not seen.
Yeah,
that.
they're killing it over there with the whole shutdown, lockdown stuff. But yeah, so that brings me to the other organization that has heavily inspired me in this is, of course, the 10th Amendment Center, because you have accomplished gains in freedom in very real, very tangible ways that people can see, feel, appreciate, and associate with our ideas. And I've been telling my organizers lately that there's something to that statement that you hear a lot, that politics is downstream from culture. Well, and that's true. And the culture comes up from the community. You know what I mean? And that's why a big part of why we have to get involved locally, because if you're doing any kind of nullification or local level campaign, if you're doing a decent job, you're mixing it up with your church groups, you're mixing it up with your nonprofits, your business owners, and engaging with that culture and affecting it with our ideas.
Yeah, man, and we've actually seen some significant effect. Like, we focus most of our work at 10th Amendment Center on a state level to undermine, defeat, or nullify federal programs. We can talk about things from trying to stop federal gun control to Affordable Care Act to surveillance, asset forfeiture, and even the Federal Reserve. But there are important things that can be done on a hyper-local level, whether it's like a city or a county level. And obviously, if we're talking about individual liberty here, the goal here is individual liberty, not like states' rights or anything like that. The goal is individual liberty. So really, it takes human action, surprise, surprise. It can't rely on any level of government, because government at all level is evil. So it really takes human action to pressure that. But what we've learned over the years, and I've been doing this type of work since 2006, we've learned that while you could have tens of thousands of people call a congressman and they just, it goes to a switchboard and they never actually change a vote. I mean, if you think near the back to the bailout times when George Bush was doing the bailouts, that great so-called conservative, it was like 100-to-1 calls against bailouts, and they do it anyways because they don't listen. They don't have any reason to listen because people keep choosing those two parties and they keep voting for them one way or the other. So you can actually have an effect on a state or local level. We've heard many state legislators tell us that if they get 10 phone calls about a single issue, even if they aren't on board, they're going to start to listen in many situations. And more so at a very, very local level, where a lot of times you'll find people, when they're doing protests, they may sit outside of like Mayor Garcetti's home on his front lawn, for example, protesting, and that can have a much stronger impact. And speaking of things like that, we've actually seen a number of things recently play out on a local level. So there's about a dozen cities right now that have banned government use of facial recognition surveillance. Any facial recognition technology totally banned, primarily here in California, but also in Massachusetts. We're starting to see it spread elsewhere. But if you want to stop mass surveillance, the DHS, the FBI, the federal government is pushing mass surveillance and working through partnerships created out of the post-Patriot Act environment to force local law enforcement to act as local surveillance tools of the national surveillance state or the international surveillance state. But by banning the use of facial recognition on a local level, that means they're not even collecting the data in the first place. And if they're not collecting the information on a local level in the first place, they're not passing it upstream to the FBI or the DHS or to ICE or whoever, and it makes it a little bit more difficult. We're not going to be able to, I don't think we can stop the federal government from being the worst government in the history of the world or the largest one on its own, but we certainly can have an impact in our own communities.
Michael Boldin, I had a question for you. You've been doing this for 15 years, and I've thought about this question a lot, and I'm glad I have the chance to ask you. You were talking about earlier. We were talking about financial collapse. That at some point it has to collapse, and I think that there's also this really weird cultural divide that has been so accelerated over the past. Get your silver to guard against the financial collapse, but the sort of the tribal stuff that you're seeing it with the Trump phenomenon, and then now with the masks that people are literally saying that people who don't wear masks are should die, and that would be a good thing. And then the anti-mask people are saying really nasty things about the pro-maskers. How does all that is that pretty unprecedented in your career, and how does that bode well for more nullification and maybe even secession in the next 10 or 20 years?
Dude, that is so cool that you asked that. Thank you. I mean, I literally have like 10 things that pop in my head. First of all, one thing that pops in my head is being in LA, we get the worst of all extremes here. So if I can go to a kind of an upper middle class, or I just call it rich people neighborhood of like Santa Monica or Silver Lake, where they're all kind of Bernie Sanders to Joe Biden type people. If you're not wearing a mask out on a sunny day and you're going for a walk and you're far away from people, you'll have someone chase you down with their baby in a stroller to get right in your face to tell you how people are dying and you need to wear a mask. On the other hand, mind you, I have this happen all the time, but I'm a mask wearer because I know that it thwarts facial recognition as well. And there are about 17 states out there that actually ban covering your face to evade police. So they've created this really weird irony amongst themselves. They've got competing bans or requirements. On the other hand, you can go to another part of it's Orange County. It's not really LA. In Huntington Beach, for example, you could be walking around wearing a mask. Let's say you're actually on your way to work or something like that. You could be wearing a mask and you'll have people chase you down and yell at you and get in your face and tell you you're an embarrassment to the city and you need to take the mask off. So I think the mentality, this Ken and Karen mentality of bossing people around rather than respecting people for making their own choices or trying to convince them in a positive way that maybe they could think of something else or just leading by example, I think it's very pervasive all across the political spectrum. And that's why I love people who support and love liberty. But anyway, so the question you're asking about really is this whole thing, has it ever been this bad? Uh, yes and no. I mean, the whole idea of cancel culture, we can go all the way back to the ratification of the Constitution, where the people who were in favor of ratification in the Pennsylvania ratifying convention, they actually banned, they did a cancel culture move on the opponents, the anti-federalists, which was a term of art, on the opponents of the Constitution. They pressured newspapers to not publish any opposing arguments. And it was so aggressive and so bad that we know that there were letters written from places like Massachusetts and Virginia and elsewhere, concerned that it was so aggressive that it would risk ratifying the Constitution if they continued in this approach. I think the problem is that people who are under this kind of pressure, there aren't enough people that would cause concern. I think people need to kind of get out of their comfort zone and do something about it. But the problem that we're talking about is something we were warned about all along, and that's the problem of factions. I was just, as you were asking this, Aaron, I pulled this up, George Washington's famous farewell address. It was originally drafted by James Madison in 1792 because he was only going to serve one term, but convinced to go another one. And he put it this way. Let me just read it off real quick. This, I think, is really just a timeless quote. He says, "The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism." So this idea of choosing one team over the other, this is something that they recognized back in the 18th century and probably far earlier than that as well. Plus the spirit of revenge. Like, I'm only going to support this policy because it just gets the other side, and vice versa. We see this going back and forth and back and forth. Years ago, Tom Woods used to talk about elections as being not really elections, but a low-grade civil war where one side tries to beat the other side over the head to get control of the entire federal apparatus. But if we don't have more decentralization, this is going to continue to get worse. And to answer the other part of your question, which I apologize I didn't jump at right away, is will this lead to more of that? I don't know about secession, but Ron Paul, back in his 2012 campaign, in a speech in Arizona, I think in Phoenix, he said, we're basically getting, maybe not secession, but we have de facto nullification because the federal government doesn't have the resources or the manpower to enforce everything that they want to enforce. That's the exact same thing that James Madison told us back in a paper called Federalist 46. He said, when states on in state-by-state basis, and that includes their political subdivisions, their local governments, they refuse to cooperate with officers of the union. That's Madison's terms. He said it would create an environment which the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. So we know that even at a time when the Fed Gov was supposed to be really, really small, not talking about banning plants or guns or telling people, what they can own, how much taxes they were going to pay, things like that. Even at that time, they recognized that without cooperation on a state and local level, federal programs were as good as hot air. And we know now, under the largest government in the history of the world, that's magnified even more. So when people refuse to cooperate, when half the team quits, partnerships don't work too well, and the federal government can't force their so-called laws, regulations, and mandates down our throats. That's my short version.
I think that gets to it. The one thing that about both sides, if we count the blue and the red team,
yes,
as the two big sides, is that they're both
evil.
Well, yeah, but they're both particularly addicted to the notion of their version of America and their right to use the government to extend and protect that vision of America. Like I noticed some Trump messaging here recently is, keep America great. There was something else that was even a little more like, hey, trying to scare people that the Democrats are going to come in and ruin everything for us. And of course, we've seen,
which is
Trump,
nuts. 27 trillion. What's the national debt? What's the national debt?
Well, I don't know today. I mean, who knows what it is today? I mean, it goes up.
This guy has enforced more federal gun control measures than anyone in history. He makes Obama look like Obama was horrible on the right to keep and bear arms and the Second Amendment. But there's been a 20% increase in federal gun control enforcement under the NRA-backed Second Amendment president. That means you cannot trust Republicans to be good on gun rights, just like you can't trust Democrats to be good on war. Because when Obama was there, they blew the hell away out of places like Libya and how many other locations. So they pretend to act a certain way when they're not in power, but when they're in power, it's just one nasty, evil blob.
Yeah, I mean, you see them just, you'll bring up the bump stock ban and they just kind of, who cares? It's just bump stocks.
It's a kitty toy. It doesn't count. I mean, but Obama's ATF specifically looked at the exact same ban. They looked at the exact same ban, and Obama's ATF said specifically, we cannot find justification in the law. The 1934 National Firearms Act and the 1968 Gun Control Act, which I'll just throw out on the side, shouldn't exist in the first place. We all know the joke about the ATF. It should be a corner store, alcohol, tobacco, firearms. I would just add a W for weed, and then that would actually make a really good business there. But like, none of this stuff should exist. And the idea that we're going to have a Second Amendment president enforcing more federal gun control than anyone in history and having an annual budget deficit that's going to be probably twice as bad as the worst in history, which was a combination of G.W. Bush and Obama in his first term. That was, I think, $1.4 trillion, and they're on pace to 2.8, 2.9. Worst in history is not a good thing. So this type of factionalism, being okay with using your side to conquer the other or just to show how tough you are or how much power you're in favor of, just is not playing out good for liberty. And I think some people are starting to catch on with that. We do notice that year in and year out, more people that wouldn't be on board with maybe a particular issue using state or local action. I see Paul Bracco is saying 26.6 trillion, at least today. Well, that's going to be 30 in no time, right? I mean, what does Joe Biden have? He's got a plan for what, $4 trillion in spending that's never going to be paid for. So it's either $4 trillion in his plan or a $3 trillion budget deficit in 1 year. I mean, it's absolutely nuts.
It might get to 30 trillion before Biden if he's the one that's elected anyway with this new stimulus spending.
It's nuts. It's nuts. I probably lost my train of thought there. I'm getting old.
What can we do to plant? I just rewatched the movie Inception with my wife a week or so ago, and that
I still need to watch that.
How was it good? How was it on a second watch?
It was better. I actually, for some reason, I was in the minority. I didn't really like it the first time.
I didn't either.
I liked it the second time.
Okay.
Maybe it was sometimes the mood I'm in when I watch a movie does it for me. But one of the idea in there is they're trying to, for like corporate espionage purposes, trying to plant a thought in somebody's mind in such a way that they think that they came up with the idea themselves.
Oh, nice.
So how can we incept people on the left and the right toward being okay with maybe giving up on their notion of, hey, all of America has to be red or blue, and then but getting them to start thinking, the California secession thing made some news a year or so ago. How can we encourage more of that?
Well, I think it's already happening on its own. We just actually have to provide more examples. So, I mean, you're hearing from leftists, from Democrats, from progressives, as solid of a 10th Amendment argument sometimes as I've ever made in my life. Historical arguments talking about nullification of the Fugitive Slave Act. I saw that in like 2018 as a featured article in Slate magazine. They would have called me a racist on Rachel Maddow's show for they did actually call me that on Rachel Maddow's show for 14 straight minutes for making those types of arguments when Obama was in office. But they do make these arguments. I think it's the establishment people that are just going to be more partisan hacky than a lot of the rest. But a lot of people tend to really choose team first. But I think over time, the people now who are like thinking, oh my goodness, this isn't going to be the last Trump, even if we get him out of here. We got to start thinking more decentralized, more local. What can I do on a local level to get what done I want done? And the same thing happened on the right when Obama was in office. I think the vast majority of people aren't in that place, but we're still getting more and more. And I think the way we can increase the speed of that is doing what Michael was talking about, was actually implementing action items that show wins. So when we ban facial recognition in San Francisco, California, then maybe someone in Austin, Texas will say, well, if they did it, why can't we? And the more that we show wins on this type of thing, the better off, the more that people will learn. A great example of this is cannabis, is weed, is marijuana. I mean, when I first started doing this work and I would talk to right-leaning or Republican groups about marijuana legalization in California, I would just get California, you hate America, this is illegal, you can't do that, supremacy clause. But here we are from 1996, and I didn't start doing that in 96, but even a decade in when I was talking to people, it was very aggressively against it. And there still is some of that left, but not nearly as much amongst the general public over the last decade or so. In fact, we saw just 2 years ago, Oklahoma, the reddest of the red states, passed the broadest medical marijuana ballot measure in history by an easy peasy margin. That wouldn't have happened. And the reason it happened in Oklahoma and in Utah and in Missouri and in other places like that is because people learned that the world did not end when people were able to grow, buy, sell, and consume a naturally occurring plant. Could the same thing happen with some people on the left in regards to the right to keep and bear arms? Maybe. I'm certainly seeing some of that type of rhetoric. And I know like over the years, I've talked to people who live in Berkeley, for example. And I say, man, the hardcore Berkeley commies are as Marxist as can be, but they can be very good on the right to keep and bear arms. They'll say things like, well, yeah, of course I love the Second Amendment. The workers, they got to be armed. I mean, they're thinking a different approach. But I think they can learn that the world doesn't end when people can defend themselves. The key is that the people on the right need to actually step up their game and start proving that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I got a question for you. So last time me and you talked on the phone, I was kind of telling you about some of the stuff that's going on with us as a caucus. We are way beefing up our teams. We're implementing 3-person teams. We have that plus in the majority of states at this point. We just added a 3-person team in South Carolina this morning, thanks to Jeff Douglas, our state coordinator. We added a 3-person team in Delaware the other day where we didn't have anybody. Our team is growing to almost 200 people. And me and you would talk. So you at the beginning of the 10th Amendment Center, you tried to do like the chapter thing, right? Yes. And that became a little unwieldy. So I was telling you about this beefing up of the teams that we're doing and how one person in each of these teams is designated to issues. So then if those guys were to come to you and say, Boldin, what are the hot topics? Where should I go? What are the issues that I should pursue and have a good shot at obtaining, whether left or right? What would be your recommendations?
Well, first of all, it depends on the state. It depends on the type of coalition work that people want to do. You absolutely can't get anything done without working with other people. And when you work with other people to get stuff done, that means you're going to work with people who hold views you find disgusting. If you're going to work with Republicans, they've got a hell of a lot of really horrible views on government, the Constitution, and liberty. If you're going to work with Democrats, you have the exact same problem. But the fact of the matter is if you can set aside differences and find common ground, you can actually accomplish something. So, for example, if you were in Arizona, let's throw out Arizona. I think Arizona really needs to have some further steps to reform and eliminate civil asset forfeiture. And you can actually find a lot of support for that from Republicans and Democrats in the state of Arizona. Now, this is on a state level, for example. But also, let's say you're in South Carolina, Greenville, for example. Why are they allowing the use of facial recognition by government employees? They could actually pass an ordinance to do that. They could pass an ordinance that actually bans the receipt of military hardware from the Pentagon under the 1033 program to reduce the militarization of local police, which is also a bridge across the political spectrum. Why not ban the use of state or local resources in places like Texas on a city level from participating in the enforcement of federal gun control, as we're seeing it ramped up in its enforcement, no matter which political party is in power in Washington, D.C. So it really depends on the locality, and it depends on the people, what their motivation is. I recommend to people, pick one or two issues that are the most important to you. Is it surveillance? Is it the right to keep and bear arms? Is it the free market? Is it the Federal Reserve? Is it war? Whatever it is, there is something that you can do locally in your area to organize and educate people and to actually take action to change things on a local level.
Yeah, that's pretty in line with what I've been telling our teams, because what we do is we have our general email list. It's thousands of people, and then that email list is cut up and automatically distributed amongst our team or our organizers by their respective state. And then it's their job, and they're in the middle of doing this, to go in and cull that list down and find the people who are working with us. And in the course of that, you start to build a roadmap. Like, let's say you have 30 Mises Caucus people in your state, and you happen to see, oh, well, there's a concentration of 12 of them in county X. Well, then that gives you the opportunity to say, okay, we have a high number of people in this town, maybe, or in this county. Maybe it's time to start looking at the towns within that county and take stock of which ones are majority Republican, which ones are majority Democrat. And then we have on our actions page, and frankly, we lifted a lot of legislation from your guys' website.
It's a very good choice on your part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's nothing like it. I mean, where else is there a repository of nullification legislation for the local level? Like, what the hell? You know, it's very difficult. I mean, otherwise you're forced to try to find local, in my experience, you're forced to try to find like local news coverages of single issue things to scan it and say, oh, the language, click that link, and maybe it takes you to some city council where it's, you know, like it gets really tedious. But yeah, so then we have a smorgasbord of sample legislation, and then they kind of do what you said, like, okay, well, we have X many people in this town, and which issue should we go for? So yeah, I mean, now you're going to be at our next team meeting, right?
Yep. What is it, September 3rd or something like that?
The 6th, the first Sunday.
I went to government school. Numbers are not my strong point. Neil is awesome. How does one approach U.S. foreign policy from a local level? Well, there's a few things. I think when we're talking about fighting against the empire, the largest empire in the history of the world, largest government in the history of the world, basically anything that you can do to weaken its impact. And the military empire covers so many different things, from the war on drugs to the surveillance state to militarization of local police, and on and on and on. So each one of these, it's not as direct. Each one of them is a very important part of it, because the more that we can actually show that we can live free, the more that we can show that the empire isn't needed to protect our freedom. And then again, you're not even talking about the irony of the oppressive taxation it takes to supposedly keep us free. So they're stealing from us in order to keep us free. I mean, it's the absurdity of that is just beyond the pale. Anyway, so that's part of it. But also on a state level, if we're talking about a state level, there's bigger things that you can do. Delegate Pat McGeehan in West Virginia, for example, has been working hard for a number of years to push forward a piece of legislation that we adapted from a previous organization called Defend the Guard, to basically say that state-level National Guard troops cannot be introduced into foreign conflicts without a declaration of war as required by the Constitution. There is more pushback on that from left and right than we see from anywhere. And he actually got that bill moved pretty far in the last year and a half or so, when they actually had the adjutant general call the Speaker of the House in West Virginia and say, well, if that bill moves forward, you're going to be on the BRAC list, which is base closure and realignment list. So they threatened them like that. And they also gave a threat to a rules committee chairman in Utah a few years ago for our legislation to turn off resources to the NSA data center in Bluffdale, Utah as well. So the bigger that you go, the harder it is to fly under the radar. So although we want to keep our eye on the ultimate goal, if we talk about like Rothbard, for example, he says, the challenge for the libertarian is to take each step forward, but also keep the eye on a long run victory. So we have to have that ultimate goal in mind of more freedom, of liberty, but we can take small steps forward at a very local level and actually appreciate them as being wins.
I want to add to that I don't know that we've published it on the Our Actions page, but we actually have a draft that an LP activist helped us with now this is a local level resolution, and as you know, resolutions there's no teeth to them, but essentially we do have a bipartisan anti-war resolution draft, and the idea is if you did a statewide campaign to get as many towns as possible to pass this thing, to make the statement that like we oppose the current foreign policy generally, we oppose the drone warfare, we oppose the sanctions, we oppose whatever, and you get a grassroots movement of towns to start to do this. Well, then you can start to open up and lobby the state to then say, okay, like, and that's something that I've really been thinking about too.
1000%. I often rail against Second Amendment sanctuaries, primarily that were passed last fall, December, in Virginia, Texas, Florida, and elsewhere, because they were pretending to be something that they're not. They're claiming that they're creating a Second Amendment sanctuary by passing a non-binding statement of intent in support of the Second Amendment. Don't call it something that it isn't. Just say, hey, look, we're on board with the Second Amendment, and this is our first step forward. We want to actually declare support. And that can actually be a powerful tool when used correctly. Thomas Jefferson's Kentucky resolutions of 1798 against the hated Alien and Sedition Acts called for nullification as the rightful remedy against federal acts that exceed the bounds of the Constitution, but they didn't nullify anything. They were a non-binding resolution that called for further action. So we know from the horse's mouth, basically, you can start out with this. So if you're talking about war, for example, and you want your state to pass a Defend the Guard Act, or you want, let's say you're in North Carolina, for example, and you learned that the state of North Carolina, through a state or a government-owned airport, was an integral part of the CIA torture and rendition program. The CIA flew people into North Carolina, and then North Carolina participated in it and got people into foreign black sites. You could say, well, the state should pass legislation to ban that from ever happening again. And one way that it will be less difficult to get things like this done is if you have 24 counties with resolutions in support of passing some type of legislation like that on a state level. So even if there isn't something super immediately concrete, like banning local police or local sheriffs from enforcing federal gun control, that is a concrete directive that can have immediate impact. There are things, if war, for example, like Neil was asking about war in the empire, there are things that you can do on a very local level that can help build a stronger movement on a state level that can have immediate impact.
So I have a bit of a side question, just that I'm curious about. I know that there's a few states. I think it's 4 of them. I know Utah is one of them that is legalized gold and silver as legal tender. Are there any? Yeah, are there any other movements in any other states that we could get behind on that?
It's one of the most important things that can be done. And back in 2011, and you can find this over at LRC, the speech that Ron Paul gave in regards to his Competition and Currency Act that he was introducing at the time. And he basically had a 3-step plan to undermine the Federal Reserve. We've incorporated this much of what he recommended into our own state level strategy. And he said, basically, you have to allow for competing currencies and legal tender laws that require only the fiat money to be used. So in a state like Utah or Oklahoma, for example, Utah, I think, is the best example, where in 2011-ish, they passed the Legal Tender Act, actually recognizing gold and silver as money as it's required to be recognized and as it has always been money in state law. It's required to be like that in the Constitution, but all 50 states have been ignoring it. So this was a very positive step in the right direction. They recognized gold and silver as money, which means it could no longer be what was one of Ron Paul's other recommendations. It could no longer be taxed as property, because if it's money and you're actually treating it as property, the example we always give on this is, for example, when let's say you buy an ounce of gold, or you bought an ounce of gold a few years ago when it was like $1,100, you just hold it, and then now it's worth, let's say, $2,000, and you want to go buy it, use it to buy something as money, and you find someone who's willing to accept it as money. The government gets involved and says, well, you're not actually using that as money. What you're doing in that transaction is you're exchanging it for fiat, and you've got a capital gain of $900 from $1,100 to $2,000, and we're first going to tax you on that gain of $900, and then you can make your purchase with the fiat. And this is a huge roadblock in the way of people actually using gold and silver in everyday transactions. So when a state like Utah says we're no longer going to have capital gains tax on the exchange of gold and silver, or even sales tax, can you imagine like taking a $5 bill, going to a store and say, give me 5 ones, and they charge you a 10% tax on it? That's in essence what they're doing with gold and silver when they add a sales tax to it as well. So they're saying you're selling it, not exchanging one money for another. So you're removing those roadblocks. And as a result, a really interesting business has actually started to flourish in the state. It's called it's Alpine Metals Exchange now. It used to be called United Precious Metals Association, UPMA.org. In essence, it's an outside the Federal Reserve System precious metal bank where you can put money in there, and real money, gold, silver, I think even palladium too. You put money in there and you can actually get a debit card that works wherever Visa, MasterCard does, and it does an automatic transition in the background. It's almost like if you're using BitPay or Coinbase in crypto, and it does an automatic transmission.
Peter Schiff has a similar thing through gold money.
They aren't doing it anymore due to some regulatory issues. Well, I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure that gold money is not doing it like this anymore.
Oh, that sucks.
UPMA.org they also created the Utah Gold Back, which is a printed out alternative currency, which actually, and I'm not sure of the technology, it actually has gold in the currency itself. So you get a 5, a 10, a 20. They're launching the Nevada Gold Back pretty soon. You just Google that, Utah Gold Back.
Yeah, that sounds like an interview, Aaron.
Yeah, these guys are amazing. They've got like $3-4 million of these worth in circulation already, and almost nobody knows about this stuff already. So this is an example of how literally passing something, we were told at the time, like, okay, they're going to recognize gold and silver as money. That's the way it should have been in the first place. So what's the point? Nothing's going to happen out of this. Well, multiple things have happened. One, they removed the taxes, just like Ron Paul said. They created a situation where a private business could create this United Precious Metals Association, and now they've also created an alternative voluntary kind of currency. They don't really call it a currency, but I can, because I don't own the business. I'm sure they don't want to run afoul of the Treasury Department there, but they're doing a really good job. And so like little things like this lead to more. And that's actually how Mises Institute has their great Latin phrase. We also have one here at the TAC. I got the idea from Mises, but it's Concordia res parve crescunt. This was a Latin phrase written by John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution in 1768, and it meant small things grow great by concord. In other words, we're building the foundation, as Jeff Dice said in the Mises Institute Supporters Summit last year. He said, brick by brick, we're building the foundation for liberty. That's how you actually move things forward.
Absolutely. So I've got one last question for you, and if we could try to keep it a little quick, because we're going to be wrapping up
this is my quick, man. Who's that?
Well, we're going to have our next stream coming up here soon.
Well, who's that?
Maj Toure.
Oh, I like Maj. I haven't met him yet, but he can.
Oh, we got to change that.
You want, you can stick around and
stick around.
Join the new one.
I'm an attention whore. It needs to be all about me.
Okay. Well, today is as I'm sure you know, Ron Paul's 85th birthday. So we're asking everybody, what is your favorite memory of the Ron Paul Revolution?
Oh my God. I was in Ron Paul meetup #1 in Pasadena, California in 2007. And I got to meet Ron Paul for the first time in my life in that like sometime early in the campaign. He gave a speech and an event at USC, and I got to hang out with him for a few minutes. And then he also interviewed me a number of years ago. One other really cool one is I did a speech opening up for Ron Paul in Greenville, South Carolina for, I think, the 2012 campaign. It was me, Ron Paul, and Peter Schiff. And to me, that was like one of the biggest honors in my life to be able to be on the stage with them, man. So, I mean, I don't want it to be about me. I learned so much from that guy. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, me as well. I mean, both philosophically, intellectually, but like personal character wise too. You know what I mean? Like that's why it's really special to me. But all right, well, Boldin, where can people listen to your podcast?
No, we can't promote me at all. People can find me whenever. We need more monthly donors for LPMC. What are we at? Did we get any new ones? Or am I?
We are at Boom 3. Let me refresh. We're at 380. We crossed 380, so we're at nearly 5,100.
Where were we when we started this stream?
I think in the 364 or something.
Okay, that's amazing. So Maj
something
needs
like
to
that.
get Maj needs to get 30,
right?
Or I just whipped his ass.
Right.
Tell him that. That's our introduction.
I will tell him that.
Like, this dude who was on before you, he's like, oh, he's kind of a fan and he wants to meet you and he hasn't been able to. But here's how he wants to meet you, by pointing out that he's got 28 new monthly donors for the LPMC, and you need to beat that or, well, you look like a whip.
That's awesome. Thank you, Boldin. It's the Road to Liberty, by the way. So that is the podcast. And we will see you on the team meeting. We really appreciate it. Our team really appreciates it. And we will continue to look to your leadership on taking human action in the decentralist manner. So thank you.
I love you guys. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. It's amazing. I'm excited to see where you guys take things.
Great. Thanks,
Hell
Mike.
yeah.
Peace.